911. What's your emergency?
It's got him. Oh God, it pulled him under. A hippo! He was right there!
Sir, I need you to stay calm. Where are you right now?
Zambezi River. He's gone, there's blood. It crushed him.
He was a seasoned guide. He knew these waters better than anyone. But on that quiet morning, he drifted too close to a mother hippo and her calves and never resurfaced. You're watching the tragic story of a man who believed respect and routine could tame nature's most volatile giant until instinct struck with brutal force. If this true story grips you, subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comment show. Closes too close when instinct is stronger than trust. For over 2 decades, 42-year-old Elias Banda had been the trusted face of Zambezi River tours, a veteran guide whose reputation was built on an unshakable bond with nature and a calm, storytelling presence that captivated guests from around the world. Locals called him the Riverman, and his knowledge of the wildlife along Zambia's waterways was unmatched. But more than any other creature, Elias held a deep fascination with hippos, those massive, brooding shapes that lurked just beneath the surface. While many saw danger, Elias saw mystery. He referred to them affectionately as misunderstood giants, often telling wide-eyed tourists that hippos were gentler than people think if you show them respect. What began as professional admiration grew into something more personal over time. Elias would recount stories about specific hippos, giving them names like Old Gray and Mama Duma, recalling past encounters as if talking about neighbors. He believed, truly believed, that the animals recognized him. His tours were famous for how close they drifted, closer than any other guide dared. While other boats lingered at a cautious distance, Elias would cut the engine and let the current nudge him silently toward a pod. His guests loved it. Those breathtaking moments of proximity felt like magic. Behind the wheel, Elias would smile and whisper, "They know we're not a threat. It's all about energy." But others noticed the shift. Park officials began to murmur. Colleagues shared quiet concerns over beers at the marina. The river rules stated clearly, maintain 50 meters during calving season. Elias called it guideline math. He'd inch to within 20, sometimes 10, joking that the hippos here are practically family. One rainy afternoon, a female hippo with a young calf mock-charged his botan, unmistakable warning. His guests panicked. One screamed. But Elias just laughed, brushed it off as a little river drama, and told the group to relax, she was just flexing. That moment stayed with the other guides, though. They began keeping their distance even more religiously. Elias, however, doubled down. His guiding philosophy was simple: connection over caution. He spoke often about the need to let nature trust you, about how animals could read your soul and respond in kind. His passengers hung on every word, believing they were witnessing something profound. To Elias, this wasn't just tourism, it was communion. But beneath the reverence and routine, a quiet arrogance was taking hold. Built on years of uneventful proximity, the hippos hadn't heard him before. He took that as proof they wouldn't. He mistook familiarity for safety, and he began to believe in a bond that in truth never existed. The warnings had been clear and growing louder. As the summer breeding season took hold of the Zambezi, fellow guides began noticing an alarming uptick in hippo aggression, especially among mothers guarding new calves. They cut their routes short, avoided known nesting banks, and kept strict adherence to the mandated 50-meter buffer zones, particularly around the more volatile pods. But Elias Banda didn't follow suit. In fact, he did the opposite. While others pulled back, he pushed forward. He believed that giving tourists an authentic experience meant getting closer, offering what he proudly called a front-row seat to the raw pulse of nature. To him, the rulebook was a suggestion, not a boundary. A public advisory had been issued just 2 weeks prior by Dr. Moses Tembo, a well-respected wildlife biologist working with the Regional Conservation Authority. "We are entering the most dangerous window for hippo-human contact," he warned. citing a string of mock charges reported by licensed operators. Guides must maintain distance and treat mother hippos as unpredictably hostile. Elias dismissed the statement in private, calling it fear-mongering for tourists who don't know better. His clients, meanwhile, raved online about the thrill of being so close you could see their eyelashes. But behind the excitement was a growing unease. One woman from Germany had filed a formal complaint after a female hippo charged within meters of their boat. Elias had laughed it off, offering her a free sunset cruise as compensation. "That's how they say hello," he'd told her, grinning. His own colleagues were less amused. One younger guide, newly certified, tried to speak up during a team briefing. "Shouldn't we be pulling back more?" But Elias brushed him aside with a pat on the shoulder and a worn proverb: "Respect earns respect. You panic, they panic." That logic didn't sit well with everyone. Isaac Mabue, the marina's boat mechanic, later recounted a conversation over a cracked engine valve. He told me, "If you respect them, they respect you." I told him, "That's not how hippos work, Elias. That's how people work." The comment didn't land. Elias believed his presence had a calming effect, that after years of peaceful coexistence, the animals had come to accept him as part of their world. It was a beautiful idea. It was also dangerously wrong. Several guides began avoiding the same launch times as Elias to prevent overlapping routes. Rumors swirled that park authorities were preparing to issue him a warning, but no citation ever came. His clients kept giving 5-star reviews. His boss kept seeing profits. The risk was quietly tolerated until it could no longer be. The mother hippo he would encounter that morning had recently birthed twins, a rare and taxing event that often leads to heightened defensiveness. Elias didn't know. Or if he did, he didn't care. He had faced down hundreds before. He thought this would be no different. He thought wrong. It was just after 6:30 a.m. on a glassy, windless July morning, the kind of calm that made the Zambezi River look more like a mirror than a living current. Mist clung low to the water, catching soft streaks of golden sun, and the only sounds were the distant calls of birds and the quiet hum of Elias Banda's motor easing to a stop. He had 6 tourists on board, a mix of couples and solo travelers, all wearing wide-brimmed hats and cameras around their necks. 3 of them were already filming. The trip had begun like any other gentle jokes from Elias, a safety briefing that skipped over the part about hippos being Africa's deadliest large animal, and then a slow cruise through the narrow channels of the Eastern Bend, where a known pod often surfaced in the early hours. And sure enough, they were there, a congregation of massive, dark backs breaching and submerging like rocks coming up for air. Elias pointed out a female with 2 calves nestled beside her, gesturing softly with a flattened palm as he whispered, "That's Mama Duma. She's fine. She's used to us." But there was something off in the way she moved. As the boat glided closer than regulations allowed, she began shifting her body between the pod and the incoming vessel. It was textbook defensive behavior, a signal Elias had seen countless times before and always chose to interpret as harmless. The tourists leaned in, delighted. One crouched to get a better angle as the mother hippo opened her mouth in a wide, gaping yawn, her pink gums and tusks glinting in the light. "Adorable," one guest whispered. But it wasn't. That open mouth wasn't sleepy or playful. It was a threat display, a visual roar, the hippo's version of a raised fist. Elias saw it, he just didn't heed it. In the back of the boat, a woman named Tara from Vancouver turned her camera off. Later, she would say in interviews, "I don't know what it was, just this feeling like we were being watched by something ancient, something that didn't want us there." She wasn't wrong. Unnoticed by the group, another adult hippo had broken from the shadows behind a low mangrove shelf and begun following them. Its massive eyes just above water, nostrils flaring silently as it glided through the current in near-perfect stillness. Elias adjusted the tiller slightly, letting the boat drift sideways with the flow, bringing them within 20 feet of the pod. The tourists were elated. Cameras clicked. One man laughed and said, "We'll never get this close again." And he was right. They wouldn't. Beneath the surface, Territorial instinct was already turning. The water, still as glass just moments before, now held a different energy wand that every animal could feel, but no human in that boat truly recognized. Not yet. It happened so fast that not a single person on board had time to scream before the water exploded beneath them. The mother hippo erupted from the river like a torpedo wrapped in muscle and rage, launching herself upward and forward with terrifying precision. Her massive body collided with the back of the boat, hitting the stern like a battering ram and lifting it partially out of the water. The impact was deafening. Elias was thrown violently off balance, the tiller wrenching sideways as his feet lost grip. One tourist later said it was like watching a car crash in slow motion, only wetter, louder, and utterly surreal. Elias hit the river face first and disappeared into the spray. The boat lurched sideways, sending cameras, backpacks, and people sprawling across the deck. Shouts turned into screams as the guests scrambled for handholds. One woman clung to the railing, crying out that something was moving under the boat. Then Elias surfaced, just once arms thrashing, his face pale with shock. He tried to call out, but before the sound could reach the boat, he was yanked back under by an invisible force. The water churned violently, flecked with foam and something darker. "It was like a nightmare," said Tara, her voice trembling during a later interview. "There was no struggle, just a snap, and he was gone." That snap was not metaphorical. Later, autopsy reports confirmed what the park rangers already suspected. Blunt force trauma had shattered his ribs and spine. The mother hippo's jaws, capable of exerting over 1,800 psi, had likely crushed his torso in a single bite. He had died in seconds, not minutes. No time to swim, no time to scream. As the remaining tourists huddled together, sobbing and soaked, the second hippo, larger, darker, and eerily silent, began circling the boat. It surfaced once, then again, each time closer. Its massive eyes locked on the passengers but made no move to charge. It didn't have to. The message was clear: "You are not welcome here." A call was made over the radio, voices tight with panic, but the signal was spotty in that part of the river. For 20 harrowing minutes, the boat drifted slowly with the current, the weight of what had just happened hanging over everyone like a storm cloud. No one dared reach over the side. Eventually, the larger hippo submerged and vanished. Rescue came hours later. Elias's body was recovered downstream near a sandbank, tangled in reeds. Blood still streaked the surface when the rangers arrived. The boat was towed back in silence. The tourists left the country the next day. None gave interviews beyond the official statements. But the image that stuck with them wasn't the violence or the screamsit, was the captain's chair, now empty, drifting half-submerged in the reeds, gently rocking as if Elias might still be there, whispering calm words to animals that had never once heard them. The body was found 5 hours later, wedged between papyrus reeds along a sandy bend in the river nearly 2 kilometers downstream. Park rangers moved with grim efficiency, shielding the tourists, now ghost pale and silent, from the sight. Elias Banda's body bore no defensive wounds, no signs of drowning. The autopsy confirmed what the river had already whispered: massive internal hemorrhaging, multiple fractured ribs, and a collapsed lung. The cause of death was instantaneous blunt force trauma. News of the attack spread quickly, first among local operators, then erupting across national and international media. "Hippo kills guide in front of tourists," blared one headline. "Zambezi safari turns deadly," said another. Social media lit up with speculation, sorrow, and outrage. In the days that followed, the Zambian Parks Department suspended all river tours in the incident zone and launched a formal investigation. It wasn't long before fingers were pointed. Some accused Elias of recklessness, citing his repeated breaches of the 50-meter rule and dismissive attitude toward hippo behavior. Others pushed back, arguing that the very nature of safari tourism demands a level of proximity that encourages risk and that enforcement of safety regulations had been lax for years. Conservationists added their voices to the storm. Dr. Tembo, the same biologist who had issued warnings weeks earlier, told the press, "This was predictable. This was preventable." and it's part of a growing trend of human encroachment justified by romanticism. Still, the backlash wasn't one-sided. Elias's family, devastated by the loss, spoke publicly only once. His sister, Ruth Banda, addressed a quiet crowd at his Riverside memorial, saying, "He loved this place more than anything. He knew the river's voice, and he died doing what he believed in." The memorial drew nearly 100 mourners' fellow guides, tourists who had ridden with him in years past, and locals who had watched him grow from a teenage boat hand to the area's most requested guide. They laid flowers on the dock, played his favorite Zambian folk song, and poured libations into the water. But even as grief settled over the region, the scientific community used the moment to issue a sobering reminder: nature is not sentimental. A report released a week later detailed the known behaviors of female hippos with young calves and reaffirmed that Elias had misread every warning sign. Anthropomorphism, the tendency to assign human traits and emotions to animals, was cited as a dangerous psychological lens that clouded decision-making in the wild. Elias hadn't been the first to fall into that trap. He wouldn't be the last. The 2 hippos involved in the attack were not relocated. Under Zambezi wildlife law, they remained fully protected, unmarked, undisturbed, and free. There would be no revenge, no removal, no retribution. The river had reacted as it always had and always would, without apology, without malice, and without memory of the man who believed he had tamed it. In the aftermath of Elias Banda's death, a wave of expert commentary swept across media platforms and scientific journals, attempting to dissect not only what had happened, but why it had happened and why it would happen again. Among those most sought after was Dr. Emily Ndlovu, a veteran zoologist specializing in African megafauna. Her assessment was clear, direct, and chilling. Hippo behavior is not random. It's protective, calculated, and deeply instinctual. This wasn't a freak incident. It was textbook. Hippos are responsible for more human fatalities in Africa than lions, leopards, elephants, or crocodiles. Unlike ambush predators, hippos do not stalk or chase for sport. Their violence stems from one core behavior: territorial defense. And there is no hippo more dangerous, more reactive, more relentless than a mother protecting her calves. The biological drive is overwhelming, shaped by generations of loss and threat. Mothers will preemptively strike anything that breaches their perceived safety zone, and not out of rage, but out of a cold evolutionary mandate. In this case, that meant a boat drifting too close and a guide too familiar to recognize the danger he had once studied. Camera footage recovered from that morning was submitted to a team of animal behaviorists for review. What they saw confirmed what they already knew. The mother hippo had displayed at least 4 separate warning signs before her final lunge: slow positioning between the calves and the vessel, a wide open mouth display commonly mistaken for a yawn, a sudden stillness just below the surface, and most critically tail swishing accompanied by underwater bubbling, a known signal of agitation. None of these were subtle. All of them were ignored. Dr. Ndlovu pointed to one cognitive bias, in particular habituation bias, the likely cause of Elias's fatal miscalculation. He had interacted with these animals for years without incident. So he assumed he understood them, or worse, that they understood him. But that's not how wild instincts work. Past behavior is not a predictor of future safety, especially with apex semi-aquatic mammals like hippos. The myth of the gentle giant was also torn apart in public discourse. While hippos may look sluggish and comical, they are biologically engineered for dominance: massive jaws, sharp tusks, high-speed charges, and a capacity for underwater movement that far exceeds human perception. They are not herbivorous cows with bad tempers, they are lethal territorial survivors. The experts emphasize that distance regulations exist for a reason. 50 meters isn't a suggestion, it's a boundary of safety, said one Zambezi park ranger. The second you cross it, the rules of nature apply, not ours. Elias Banda had unknowingly violated that boundary one too many times, believing routine had earned him exemption. But in the eyes of the hippo, no such exemption existed. In the final report issued by the Wildlife Authority, a single sentence concluded the behavioral analysis: This wasn't an attack. This was a defense. And that subtle difference is what transforms a tragedy into a lesson for guides, tourists, and anyone who dares mistake proximity for peace. It wasn't rage, it wasn't revenge. It was instinctual, ancient, and indifferent. Elias Banda's death was not the result of some cruel betrayal, but of a line crossstone he believed didn't apply to him. For years, he had seen the Zambezi not just as his workplace, but as something sacred, almost personal. He believed he'd earned its trust. He believed the animals knew him. But nature doesn't recognize names or relationships. It only knows territory, threat, and survival. Elias mistook proximity for permission, routine for safety, and love for immunity. In doing so, he stepped too close to a mother whose only language was protection. The bond he believed in was never mutuality, was a projection, a beautiful illusion shaped by years of silence that felt like understanding. And in the end, it cost him his life. What if he had stayed 10 feet back? What if he had paused when the mother moved? What if he had listened to the warnings not from animals but from people? His death leaves us with more questions than answers and more sorrow than outrage. A smiling photo of Elias with a hippo now circulates online, captioned with admiration. But just a few meters downstream, the empty riverbank where he died sits unchanged, silent, and unknowing. There is no plaque, no marker, just reeds, current, and the same cold water that took him. He wasn't the first, he won't be the last. Because this story is not about a villain, or even about a mistake, it's about a truth we struggle to accept. Nature doesn't grant affection, no matter how much we offer it. It doesn't forgive misunderstandings. It doesn't bend to the depth of our passion or the years we invest. It doesn't care what we believe it owes us. It only reacts. That is the lesson Elias leaves behind. A lesson written not in textbooks but in blood and water. And as more people seek intimacy with the wild through lenses, through touch, through trust, we must remember the unspoken rule it has always followed. The wild doesn't grant second chances, it only reacts.